Good morning, everyone. Sorry, that should have been good afternoon, everyone. That's my first blooper of today's event. My name is Michelle Gamble, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Frontline Recruitment Group and Express Employment Professionals. Firstly, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Thank you, everyone who's joined us today, for sharing some of your time to learn what makes people feel good at work. So I've gotten that blooper out of the way. Hopefully that's the only one. But I also wanted to introduce you to my colleague, Jolene Holton, who'll also be joining me in today's webinar. And Jolene is our very trusted people guru here at Frontline Recruitment Group and Express Employment Professionals Australia and New Zealand. And I'm really pleased to have her join me on the call today, especially as unfortunately our CEO, Arthur McColl, is feeling a bit under the weather today and so is unable to present. So I'm picking up the baton from him, and I'll do my very best to present his slides. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do it in the Scottish accent that he has, but we'll save that for another time. But anyway, we'll get on with today's presentation. So to start with, just a little bit about housekeeping. We really do want questions from our attendees today, and we'd love you to pop those in the chat as you as they arise through the presentation. We've allocated about 45 minutes for the actual presenting part of today, so that we have 15 minutes for questions, and so we'll be addressing those questions you pop in the chat in that last 15 minutes. We're also recording the session today, so if you're unable to stay on for the full session, you will get the recording sent to you following today's webinar. And that'll come along with the Feel Good Index report early next week. So those things should land in your inbox then. So a little bit about the report. We launched the Frontline Feel Good Index in response to really what our agency owners were seeing, these big changes in candidate behaviour last year as we were kind of rocking and rolling through the pandemic. And so we really could see that we needed to find out more about what was going on and how candidates in particular were feeling. You know, we also needed to understand, you know, what mattered to them when it came to finding a job in the workplace. And so now we've invested in that research again in 2022, and we'll be sharing, you know, what's changed, obviously, as we roll through this very dynamic environment, and what trends are growing amongst employees and employers as we compare the data year on year. And we'll also share some new insights from new questions we've included in the report this year. So before we dive into the data, just a little bit about the survey. We had over 1,000 people participate in the survey across Australia and New Zealand over April and May this year. I assume some of those people are on this call, so big thank you to them, big shout out, thanking them for their insights. And the participants came from our extensive database of clients and candidates across the retail, hospitality, health, education and construction sectors. And as well as more broadly, the online audience via the promotion of our survey online. So the survey shares insights overall, as well as by industry, country, and also some generational insights as well. And we ran the survey over April and May this year. So today's presentation will cover some data on the job market overall, the main findings of our research, and we'll have a bit of a wrap up of what this means for both employers and employees, as well as some specific trends for the industries that we specialise in and what the opportunities are in those industries going forward. So firstly, what's going on out there? Well, job ads are at their highest that we've seen, particularly as the SEEK data sort of shares here. They're at the highest that they've seen in their history. And candidate availability at the time that job ads are really high is very low. And I'm sure that's no surprise to anyone that's on this call today. And this is predicted to continue for another 12 to 18 months. So as we can see, you know, candidates aren't applying for roles through the traditional methods like SEEK, but we are starting to see changes in candidate behaviour from last year, where people were kind of sticking to their roles. They were prioritising job security in the early stages of the pandemic. And that is starting to see change. We're predicting quite a bit of change in that over the next 12 months. And that lines up with what the ABS is actually saying as well, that they're expecting people to change jobs. It's going to be at a record high in the next 12 months. And New Zealand sort of tells us the same story, as you can see here. Unemployment is at its lowest level in 36 years in New Zealand. And of course, New Zealand did feel the impact of some of the toughest lockdowns in the world, which has obviously contributed to candidate availability. But even as they're coming out of that, we are expecting to see staff shortages worsen before they improve in the coming period. So as we can see here, SEEK are telling us that applications per ad in Australia is the lowest that it's ever been in the past decade. And whilst we don't have that data available from New Zealand, our agency owners would definitely tell us that they're experiencing the same thing. You know, finding candidates is a challenge, and we have to go beyond sort of some of the traditional methods at the moment. So understanding really what's going on with candidates is so important, because candidates are absolutely king at the moment, and we really need to understand how to attract and retain them in this current market. So we can start to dig a little deeper and sort of saying, well, what's changed this year when it comes to people feeling good at work? So in 2021, you know, culture was more generic, and now people are getting a lot more specific about what culture is, and leadership is appearing as sort of number one on the leaderboard this year. It's a new appearance in our top 10, and you know, it's really about leadership at all levels of the organisation. And as we can see as well, something else that's making it in our top 10 is location. And this is obviously as a result of people going back to the workplace versus working from home for a lot of people, and how close they are to the workplace obviously makes a big difference to their lifestyle, but also people looking at new ways of working and potentially changing where they live as part of, you know, changing their whole way that they work. Well-being has also really increased in importance amongst what makes people feel good at work. And even though lockdowns are over, caring for the whole person in the workplace is increasingly important, especially given that in many of our industries that we recruit for, staff have been under incredible pressure through this whole period, and are continuing to do so. If you think about the health and the education, hospitality and retail sectors, dealing with a lot of staff shortages and you know, disruption. So this year we asked a new question, and it really leads on to that wellbeing point, about understanding, you know, compared to last year, how much they disagreed or agreed with some of these statements around, you know, being able to talk about their mental health at work, about stress and about burnout. And, you know, as we can see, as I said before, mental health is really on the table in the workplace now. It's not something that people talk about as part of just their personal life. It's something that it needs to be acknowledged in terms of the ability to talk about it and how it impacts people at work. And of course, as we said before, the ongoing impact of those staff shortages is definitely being felt across the board. with, you know, less workers around, staff shortages, workers being furloughed due to COVID, and those sorts of things have put a lot more pressure on people in the workplace. So what can we expect to change in the next year? Well, we're definitely starting to see a shift in sentiment from employers. So whilst employers are saying it's slightly easier to attract people, to recruit people, it's definitely not easy. Obviously, we're recruiters, so we, you know, we can really attest to that. But what we are seeing is a bit of a jump in retention becoming more difficult. And what we're seeing is that people are a lot more likely to get tapped on the shoulder at the moment, just given that nobody is applying for jobs on those platforms we were talking about. And so, you know, passive candidates are being targeted versus that traditional way of recruitment. And we're definitely seeing that across the board. So the headlines have been telling us for a while that, you know, all this talk of a Great Resignation hasn't really impacted Australia and New Zealand. Well, it's here, it's arrived, and we actually think it's going to be a bit prolonged. In fact, you know, here at Frontline, we're calling it the ongoing resignation. And what we're seeing is definitely a rise in people expecting to change roles in the next 12 months. That's up 8% from last year. And some people are already starting to make that shift. You know, the first people that are probably going to ride this wave, from what our research is telling us, is people in the hospitality sector. I'm sure that's no surprise to hospitality clients and candidates who are on this call. There's a lot of choice out there in the hospitality market at the moment. And Gen Z also are likely to make a shift in the next 12 months. And they're obviously that younger generation who are looking for career progression and career opportunities. And then, of course, lower income earners who obviously, you know, are going to be the first to feel the pressure on things like interest rates, inflation, and they'll be looking to move for better income opportunities. So the trends that we're seeing is that people who are not happy at the moment are actually active. So they're looking elsewhere, actively out there looking for new opportunities. But then there's a whole factor of people as well who they're not necessarily unhappy, but they're looking to align their careers more with what they want in their lives and what's important to them. And they're making those kind of changes. And then there are people who are actually pretty content, who aren't even looking, but all of a sudden something great comes along, they get the tap on the shoulder. And they're being actively enticed into new opportunities. They're that passive candidate market that we were talking about. And we're definitely seeing that here, even at Frontline. You know, some of our recruitment consultants are being approached for internal recruitment roles. And so it's becoming, you know, really important, that retention factor that we talked about before. But there is good news. You know, there remains, you know, definite optimism out there in terms of business growth and employee growth in the business community. So that's good for all of us. And employees are looking to grow their teams in the next 12 months. But really what our research does tell us is that they're going to have to be pretty innovative in how they do that. And this report will give more insight into that, especially in this short to medium term. So with that, I'm going to hand over to the real expert when it comes to people and attraction and retention and culture and all those things, Jolene Holton, who is our Chief People Officer. So Jolene is incredibly experienced. She's been working in the HR and people space for over 20 years, and she's worked across financial services, hospitality, and also the franchise sector. She ran talent management as well for Western Union and was responsible for over 10,000 employees. So she knows a thing or two about people. And she actually runs her own business specialising in talent, people and culture. And Jolene and our CEO have actually worked together over the past 6 years, previously at Collective Wellness Group. So they're the organisation that runs the Anytime Fitness, Extend Bar and Orange Theory brands in Australia. And now we're lucky enough to have her come and join us here at Express Employment Professionals and Frontline Recruitment Group as our Chief People Officer. So I'm going to hand over to the real expert in the room here, Jolene. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michelle. I am very excited to be here today and to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart. So obviously lots of employers and candidates on the call today. So hopefully some of this information will be helpful just around what has changed in this space. So it's fair to say that work and the ways that we work over the last 3 years has changed more significantly than it has in the last 30. Now that's a very scary thought. So in the last 3 years, it has changed more than the last 30. So just let that sink in for a second. So what they're really saying is not since internet became kind of commonplace back in the late 80s to 90s, has there been such a significant shift. Forbes are even going so far as to say this really could be called our next industrial revolution. What I think is interesting around that, whether that's true or not, or turns out to be true, is that for the first time in history, this kind of reshaping of the organization is not just about optimizing productivity and performance and profitability for the employer, but it is about optimizing things for humanity, for the employee. Which is the first time in history that that's really happened, that kind of really big shift. So it's not just the obvious things that have changed. We can all talk to flexibility has changed, working from home arrangements where it suits for different industries. The digital age obviously took a huge jump forward, e-commerce, etc. They're kind of obvious changes that have happened over the course of the last couple of years. But more subtly, but I think more fundamentally, has been this shift in employee expectations. It's what we value, what we prioritize. It's what we will tolerate and what we expect of our employers. And that is what has shifted. And that is what's going to continue to cause a number of things that the employers on the call need to start to think about around. Those things won't change, or they won't necessarily, they will change, they won't go away. But what's happening is employee expectations is surpassing and changing faster than employers can keep up. And so really these sorts of surveys that happen kind of more frequently are really important for us to kind of keep a finger on the pulse around what's changing, what's important, how are people feeling, and how do we adapt our strategies in order to be able to meet that? How do we change the wording in our ads? How do we change what we talk about in interviews? How do we think about retention slightly differently? So it's really important for us to kind of think about what matters and where are our people. So we're going to dive into some of that research now. So in this next kind of slide, you'll start to see some differences in how people are feeling across the generations. And so there's some common things that are happening here across these generations, but there is also some things that are subtle. And so I just want to kind of raise a couple of those. So first one is around kind of our youngest kind of group, which is our Gen Zs. So these are our under 27s currently, based on kind of the dates. These are the most likely to move within the next 12 months. So if you have a large demographic of this group, you will probably be already feeling that. These people are, they're the most eager to kind of new experience, because career growth, they're the least tolerant to things that they're not happy with, whether that be leadership, culture, the job I'm doing. So again, their appetite to change and move is greater than some of our other generations. They're also the least burnt out. And again, there's a few different reasons that might play into that. One of them is going to be these people have grown up with technology. So they're very digitally savvy. So again, that whole exhaustion that can come from a day spent on computers to then, going and spending nights doing much the same thing. They're much more attuned to it than potentially some of the other generations. And they've also just grown up with a more agile way of working and that kind of mindset. Our millennials, our 28 to 42, these guys have really felt the emotional stress of the pandemic period more than the other generations, interestingly. And so some of the rationale behind that, if you think about that age group, 28 to 42, quite a big group. These are the ones, they're not exclusive to this particular demographic, but definitely proportionately, there are a greater percentage of this group that again, starting out with mortgages, families, etc. So the financial and family challenges that this group have experienced in the last few years has been the most significant. For those on the call that fall into that group, we'll all remember fondly, potentially at some point in the future, all of the homeschooling challenges, all those things. So this group kind of had both kind of work and home pressure. They're also most likely to sit in that middle management group, and that is the one that gets squeezed quite a bit. They're not necessarily the ones that make all of the big kind of big strategic decisions for the organization, but they are the ones that are the most impacted when it comes to team changes, having to communicate all of those things. When we lose people, they have to pick up slack, all those things. So again, just proportionately, these people take on kind of that burden. I think the interesting thing for the employers on the call to note is that that burnout doesn't go away. So we don't miraculously say, we've now ended kind of, or we've passed the bulk of the kind of lockdowns, all those things. And so this should all lift. That doesn't happen. The stress levels that get created stay with us in terms of the way our brains process. And so it becomes harder for us to accept new challenges. And so we get burnt out faster. So we have to think of some different techniques to be able to really help that group. Gen X, they've kind of bounced back from some of the stress faster than some of the other, than our millennials. Some of that could be due to, they'd already built up some financial security, the kind of rich recruitment market that it is at the moment, also giving them a level of confidence that their experience is being rewarded should they move. So again, some of that stress has come off. However, and you can see that point down the bottom there, the research suggests this is the group that is the most open to the tap on the shoulder over the next few months. So the ones to be careful of. And our baby boomers, that overwhelm, again, that sense of, things shifting very, very quickly. And it's also in a time in their lives where, I've got to think about the future. We're thinking about what does that look like in terms of security. So that sense of a bit of stress is also kind of prevalent with that group. So if we look at the same kind of demographics, but we now start to think about, okay, that's how they're feeling. Now what's important to them, we start to have a look at a couple of different things. So on here, again, some similarities across the group. And if you have a look, just kind of scan the top three, you can see a few common words in there. So definitely learning, career growth, fundamentally important across kind of each of those groups. And this leadership, what does leadership mean, and the importance of leadership to creating the right environment for me is also quite common across all of the generations. Some of the differences, so for Gen X, what's changed in the last 12 months based on our research here, it's exactly the same top three, but just in a different order. So learning has gone from second to first. So again, that thirst for career progression, growth, learning new skills, very, very important to that group. Millennials, leadership has gone from third to first. So that's that group around how are you looking after me, the culture, how are you creating an environment that I need to be in? So they're definitely looking at the leaders to help with that stress and burnout we just talked about. And wellness is new. So in that same vein, wellness wasn't in the top three last year, but it's bang in that number 2 spot this year. Generation X, some of the biggest changes. So well-being and technology are both new in that group. So well-being being very important to that group around my ability to be able to manage that stress, manage the things that are going on around me. Technology is changing and I need to keep up. So all of those things, and my ability to work autonomously and be able to make decisions. Again, baby boomers have had quite a significant change year on year. Learning has gone from the 3rd place to the 1st, and new to the list is technology and location. Where is the physical location that I need to go to, and what sort of commute does that look like, and where's my kind of level of tolerance? So that's just a snapshot across the different generations. If we have a look at how happy this group, all of these people are, I think what's interesting here, and it talks to some of Michelle's points earlier. So across here, you can see those top two categories. 80% are happy generally, versus 73% last year. So again, I'm hoping that speaks to the fact that we're now out of so many of our border restrictions and lockdowns and things like that. So generally, we are a happier bunch of both Australians and Kiwis, which is good to see. So the unhappiness, if you like, down the bottom there has gone from 16% to 13% this year, and unemployment has gone from 11% to 7% this year, which is not represented on this gap, but that's the difference. So again, a happier bunch, which is fantastic. And there's not a huge amount of difference again for the Australians and Kiwis. We're pretty similar. The Kiwis are slightly happier and slightly less likely to leave, but don't get too excited if you are from New Zealand. It's about a 3% difference, so not huge significance, but just marginally happier than the Australians, and marginally less likely to leave. So you can shout for that. What is interesting on this graph is this kind of middle bucket, and that is that group that is, although I'm happy, 57% are saying I'm open to change. So as an employer, that is a horrifying statistic, because what it means is I'm doing all of the right things. They're really happy, but if someone taps them on the shoulder for something, they're pretty open to it. So again, this is my frightened emoji kind of feeling as I sit here and go, whoa. So again, we need to really think about what are we doing to really try and safeguard our top talent? How are we thinking differently about this? And it really talks to that kind of proactive recruitment that many people are experiencing, where they're getting emails, LinkedIn, they're getting all sorts of things for those taps on the shoulder. Those active kind of headhunting initiatives are just very rampant at the moment. So as I said, we really need to be safeguarding people by putting proactive strategies in place. So what can we do? And this again just brings out some of the research and some of the areas that we touched on in our survey, and you'll be able to see this in much more detail when the reports are distributed, and they cut this by industry, which is fantastic. So you can really start to delve in. So I know it looks like a bit of a shopping list on this slide, but really what it's saying is these 12 areas are what are constantly kind of coming up as the most important. They obviously vary slightly by industry. And the ones at the top are really quite central, irrespective of industry. So the leadership and therefore the culture that is created, think of leadership not as your top kind of tier. It's not the CEO. It's anyone that controls me, from the team leader, supervisor, etc. It is anyone that is controlling what I do day to day is what's classified as leadership. Learning and development, career opportunities, well-being, flexibility, and my ability to be able to work autonomously and make decisions. So my empowerment levels, irrespective of industry, those ones are fundamental and coming at the top of that list. So what we're going to do now, and I'm going to go through the rest of this quite quickly, is I'd like to kind of unpack some of this and hopefully share a few insights. So first thing that I want to just kind of say and call out is the gap between what employees are saying I value and where employers are saying they're focusing their initiatives, their budgets, over the course of the last 12 months. That divide is widening, which is, again, talks to the point I was trying to make at the start, that employees' expectations are changing faster than employers are able to keep up. And so my best thing here is to arm yourself with as much current information as you can, and to ensure that your budgets and initiatives can be agile enough to be able to adapt to the demographics that you're looking at. As you can see, the difference between if you've got lots of Gen X and millennials versus baby boomers and Gen, so again, depending on what that mix looks like, you need to change things, work with your recruitment specialists to make sure that you're targeting correctly. Because as I said, as that gap widens, what you're saying, here are our benefits, here's why come work for us, may not just be hitting the mark with exactly the demographic of the person that you're looking for. So we need to be careful of that gap. So first one we said is leadership, and good leaders matter now more than ever. And so what has become absolutely evident in this pandemic is the importance of leaders in helping me feel human versus a human resource. So that whole piece around how I'm managed, how you make me feel, what you do in terms of making me, respect the fact that, I'm an individual and I've got specific needs, that the reliance and the expectation employees have of employers and their leaders to do that is more prevalent than ever before. And so you can see that in our statistics here. You can see that in 2022, those stars there, it was rated 4.1 average across Australia and New Zealand out of 5 in terms of importance. So it was rated as the number one thing. And again, that's about how the leaders are treating me, how they are constructing the culture, etc. However, what you can see from an employer where the employer focus has actually gone down. So we focused a little bit more on it throughout the pandemic because we knew people needed that assurance, people needed it as they were kind of going through the pandemic, but we the research is suggesting we've taken our foot off the pedal there a little bit, and the research is kind of telling us we need to kind of do the opposite. So this is really about how do we equip our leaders at all levels of the organization with new skills in order to be able to meet that expectation. You can see that in a little quote here, which again comes from the Centre of Workplace Leadership. And the bottom piece there, I think, is the standout. Leaders who understand the interaction of people, places, and technology will be best placed to succeed in the future. So again, what is your leadership kind of development strategy? How does that work? Will be a fundamental thing to look at for the next few months. The value of values skyrockets, and this is it's been kind of talked about for many years now, but this is about the purpose and values of the organization. The direction is becoming more and more important to employees, and that alignment between what is valuable to me and me feeling good about where I work as an employee is becoming more important. And this isn't about creating this big altruistic, which I think so many organizations tried to do. We need to talk about solving the world, to changing world hunger, that needs to be our purpose. It's really about communicating to your employees and potential job seekers, what is it that we do that helps the world? Whether that's we help people have an amazing holiday in our, hospitality venues. We help, children, with their education. It's coming back to what is innate to your business, but really celebrating that and making sure that becomes fundamental to who you are and what you talk about in terms of your strategy and direction. The clearer that is, then it definitely supports your attraction and retention strategy. Another piece of kind of link to that is around kind of the communication. So again, lots of feedback around communication, incredibly important for employees and for job seekers. But again, it looks like if you look at that bottom graph, that again, employers have just taken a little bit less focus over the course of the last 12 months. And that's probably because in the height of the pandemic, again, we were communicating all the time so people knew what was going on, but not necessarily paying as much attention to it now. And yet again, it's still a heightened area of focus for employees when there's still so much that people need that security, whether it's, they're hearing on the news, the war, inflation, blah, blah, blah. So again, just communicate is the message that employers and job seekers are definitely yelling. Some great statistics here just around employer branding. And my message here is simple. It's really around your reputation precedes you. We know this as employers that are trying to recruit. And that is that 75% of job seekers consider an employer's brand even before applying. So they're looking on things like Glassdoor, they're looking on your website, they're looking on social media. So this concept of the employer brand, so not your brand, your company brand, but your brand of who you are to work for, is preceding you, that reputation. So being able to carefully craft that, being able to make sure you are communicating that reputation is a positive one, is something that all HR professionals need to start to think about in terms of what is that and how am I proactively managing it? And I know that won't come as a surprise to anyone on the call. Learning is the next area, and as you saw on those demographics slides, learning comes up across in the top 3 for almost all of those demographics. So incredibly important. And so if we have a look at the graph here, again, 4 out of 5 stars, you can see this is an area that our employees and job seekers are looking for. It speaks to not just learning, and there's lots of research around what types of learning people are looking for, and it is really quite broad. Looking for professional development, I'm looking for interpersonal skills, I'm looking for very tactical skill development depending on the industry. What is probably sits above all of that is, I just want whatever you promise to be delivered. And I'll show you a quote in just a minute, but that's probably where the tap in the shoulder or on the shoulder is where we are most vulnerable. So I think we've all talked about, providing learning opportunities, providing growth and succession planning for many years. It's always been part of most industries and most organizations' value proposition. But it's now coming to the pass that if I feel like I've been promised that by an organization and it hasn't come true, or it's not happening, the way that I anticipated, I am more open when somebody kind of taps me on the shoulder. So it's definitely a part of this kind of attraction and retention kind of piece more now than ever. You can see here a LinkedIn statistic, frightening statistic, right? Sky high, around 94% of employees said that they would stay at their job if it was invested in their learning and development. Irrespective of how much that jumps, that number, it's always going to sit really high. So again, how we're prioritizing, and importantly, as that retention tactic, how am I demonstrating to you that not only am I saying it, but I'm delivering on it? This next one is just a quote from one of our agencies that talks to that, just saying most people, or most, if I read that, most of the candidates we speak to who are looking at moving are doing so because of broken promises, and it's broken promises around career development, growth opportunities. So again, that's a key one for us to think about. Wellness. So going through these quite quickly. So the time for a kind of holistic approach to wellness. And if I jump straight to the statistics here, I think the call out here is we all absolutely appreciated throughout the pandemic that wellness became kind of front and center, because obviously COVID was a health crisis first and foremost. So that kind of concept of wellness came out. It also obviously it brought out a number of things around our need as employers to provide mental health support. How are we trying to manage that and help that for our teams? That, as I said, hasn't gone away. So that ability to be able to provide wellness support in many ways, whether that's mental health, physical health, burnout, all of those things, our ability to be able to support that is now crucial, and is likely one of the ones that will stay true for many years to come. Is employees will come to expect that almost as a given, that you as employers will help me to manage my state of wellness. So again, the more that we continue to kind of unpack this and create really robust initiatives around supporting people's financial wellness, mental wellness, emotional wellness, will continue to come up. And you can kind of see again, it's sort of started to slip backwards a little bit for employer focus. So potentially one to think about. The generation that, and we talked to this earlier, the generation that was most impacted throughout the pandemic were the millennials, and we spoke to that around, the financial and family commitments, in addition to kind of work pressure. It kind of helped to cause that sense of burnout. So they're the group to be most kind of mindful of at the moment around what are we doing to ensure that group get back to a better state of equilibrium. The flex in your flexibility counts. So this is really talking to, we know that flexibility, it's definitely been a buzzword over the course of the last couple of years, but flexibility doesn't necessarily just mean where I work. So for many industries, particularly on this call, being able to provide flexible work around working from home a few days a week just isn't an option. If you have a hospitality outlet, if you have a school, if you have, those things, you just need people to be physically in that environment, retail. So it's starting to think about how do we do flexibility differently? And that's about how do we start to give people a sense of control over their lives in some way at work. So whether that is, as we've said, location, hours, the types of projects that I do, how I control my career in terms of the development. So starting to think differently about flexibility. And you can again just see here on this next slide that that flexibility continues to be important. We've just got here flexible workplace and flexible hours for how our employers have thought about it before, but I would encourage you to just keep thinking about, are there different ways of thinking about flexibility, even if I can't change the location? Can I think about 4-day weeks? Can I think about changing work hours, 9-day fortnights? Different ways of thinking about when people can control when they take leave, those sorts of things. Anything that enables you to give an employee back a sense of control of something is a ability to be able to increase your flexibility, and that is definitely going to be a benefit. And just kind of rounding out all of the ones we've talked about is about this money. Money matters, but in different forms. So interestingly, a lot of the research over the course of the last couple of years has been around money, that the focus on money has decreased, and all of these other areas have increased. We're sort of seeing that switch. It's not saying that it's that the other areas aren't important. That what it's saying is that money is absolutely back on the table now as kind of a prime conversation. And really that, again, we're in a candidate-driven market. So that is obviously important. People know that they can demand more. So definitely you've seen that in lots of media attention around how much compensation rates, base rates have gone up. But the different forms is a really important one, because I think we need to really stretch how we think about compensation and what people consider as compensation versus just benefits, because that is a different conversation as well. So if I flick through, again, you can kind of see here a little bit of the data just around kind of where it's sitting. And you can see for the employers table down the bottom, it's talking about financial incentives, where we've kind of prioritized that industry, salary increases and additional perks and benefits. Really, the message is, how do we think about both base salary, but how do we think about other things that will, in a candidate's mind and an employee's mind, be just as important as compensation. This is by no means a definitive list on this next slide, but I have put together a couple of examples. Many of you will be using many of these, but the ones that I've got here in the first column are typically things that people associate more as compensation. So there can be, not always, but there can be a trade-off to base compensation or increases, or the level of increases. So bespoke work arrangements, so job rotations, things like that, having part-time work and having multiple people do, splitting the roles, etc. Additional annual leave, financial incentives, so fixed versus variable pay, healthcare benefits that have a true financial value to them, development initiatives. I'm going to enroll you in this particular program, it needs to be significant. It could be here's a $5,000 kind of investment in your development. People will typically value that like compensation. And stage of life benefits, I call this, so it's things like enhanced study leave for someone, parental entitlement, superannuation, advice services, whether that be, counseling, financial support, etc. So if you can do those things, that can absolutely offset some of the base compensation conversations. The ones on the other side, absolutely nice to have, absolutely valuable for retention, and they definitely drive engagement. But most people don't consider them to be compensation. The only one, potentially the one at the top, depending on what car means, and the value of that kind of car parking or car allowance. So that's probably the other one that could fit on the other side. So hopefully that helps. This last slide is just kind of pulling out a couple of the key things for some of our different industries and what they're seeing. So you'll see a lot of this in the report, but lots of things in here around succession planning, reimbursing things like, for the nurses, reimbursing the competency assessment program, certifications in construction, dedicated hours for development. So again, across the different industries, people are trialing different things in order to attract and retain. And I would certainly encourage that, because I think there is nuances obviously in those industries. So lots of information. I hope that helps. And I'm excited for you to see the reports. I think they're fabulous. I'll hand back to Michelle.
Blooper number 2, the old mute. Thanks so much, Jolene. That was a great overview of just some of the things that are in the report. But we've got, I guess the key takeaways from today's session, and we'll start with candidates, given that they are king at the moment. But as our research shows, it's very much a candidate-driven market right now. And, for candidates, there's never been a better time really to go to your employer and ask them for things that will make you feel happier at work. As we saw before, retention is becoming increasingly something that's keeping employers awake at night. So they're going to be probably more receptive now than ever before to, making your work life better, with a view to hanging on to you. So, don't be afraid to go to them first when it comes to developing your career, than necessarily running off to the bright new shiny offer that you've had from somebody tapping you on the shoulder. But also, if you are looking to move somewhere, really consider the total value proposition of any employer. How's your next career move going to build your career in the long term? You might get a short-term gain on a move, but is it actually going to make a difference in the long term? And also, does it really meet the needs of what you want in your life? What sort of hours do you need to work? What's going to keep you motivated and engaged and ultimately happy? And also, we are talking about employers are offering all sorts of things to attract and retain people, but really it's up to you to take full ownership of your career. And really understanding what you need to build your career, your own development and progression, and really being on the front foot with all of that. And then if you are going to move roles, really go beyond the job ad. Understand, go and look at the careers page online, have a look at their socials. What does it say about their workplace culture? There's a lot of other third-party sites as well that talk about what it's like to work somewhere. And if you know someone, obviously that's a great place to start, someone who's working for the employer you're looking at, or someone who does know someone. But the more you know about the employer, the better. And also, if you do get to that interview stage, it certainly makes you look good if you've clearly done your homework, and you can talk about what you think it would be like to work there, and ask smart questions. So making a move can be really good for you, but really doing your due diligence will help you make the most of the current job market. And then when it comes to employers, good leadership at every single level at the business is critical at the moment, as well as, really good transparent communication across the board to help people navigate kind of this really dynamic time in their lives, both at work and, on other levels. Also just really, Google your own brand. What does it say online about your organisation as a place to work? Have you got a really good, compelling employer value proposition? And is it really well communicated across all of the right channels? Here at Frontline, we've been doing a lot of this sort of work ourselves. So, get the marketers involved and, help them really bring that heart and soul of the organisation out. And just, proactively check in with your teams and discuss their development, their career goals and their well-being. Don't wait for them necessarily to come to you. But finally, we can do as many studies as you like, but nobody is closer to the coalface right now than your recruiter, who's literally having hundreds of client and candidate conversations every month. They've got their ear to the ground on an incredibly dynamic, rapidly changing environment. And they're the best people to really guide and advise you on the most innovative ways to work in the current job market. They're really the experts, and their advice on how fast to move and what sort of things to offer is definitely in your best interest. So that brings us really to the end of the presentation today. As I said, we've really keen to take questions. And I think there's some already in the chat box for us as well here. So I might actually just start by throwing to Jolene, but please do pop any further questions in the chat box. But Jolene, one of the big ones here is, and it is a big one, I hope you've got your crystal ball ready. How do you predict this feedback will change over time?
I think it will continue. I think it will continue to change, particularly and quite kind of radically, really, over the course of the next 24 months. As I said, I think the shift of employee expectations, I think, will continue as we kind of try to figure out what this new norm starts to look like. So I think a few things will change. I definitely think the need for individual style benefits. I think most organizations, not all, some are already doing this, where they have the ability, but most organizations try to think about benefits holistically across the organization. I'm going to put, medical support in across the board. I'm going to put this in for everyone in the company. I think there'll be an expectation that we need to just break that thinking. As we go to this more humanistic kind of way of thinking, it's that Michelle needs something very different to what Jolene needs, to very different to what, Arthur needs. So I think this ability for us to wrap our heads around, how do I provide enhanced superannuation to Mary, but provide some fitness related and health related allowances to John, and our ability to manage that as organizations, I think, will be something that we'll need to really start to grapple with. I think remuneration will shift significantly over the course of the next couple of years, already has, but as people have now started to do a bit of a reshuffle and move in certain industries, they've moved more regional. I've taken the advantage to move states, etc. I think we'll start to see and a lot of our remuneration reflect more national standards versus what has traditionally been regional and metro and different states. I think that will start to blend a lot more than it does now. I think wellness, flexibility, those things will continue to be hot topics in every industry, even in industries where they think that that's a challenge. And like I said, it's thinking beyond location.
Okay, thank you. Another curly one.
Okay.
So as we know, we've got lots of frontline industries that we recruit for, and one of our clients here has asked, working in a hospital makes flexibility a little bit difficult and work from home difficult. what, if you can't address those issues, what else could you be doing from a retention point of view in that kind of environment?
Yeah, so I think it's trying to look at where do I have the ability to be able to create flexibility and control. So it could be, again, from an hours perspective, am I starting to explore things like different operating hours, or shift hours? Am I starting to think about things like 4-day weeks, 9-day fortnights? Am I starting to even think about, here is an open roster, we need this number of people, and actually people can start to pick what shifts they do. And as long as I've got the right skill sets, again, I'm not saying that's an easy one to walk into. But again, it's what's my ability to be able to get people to embrace and have a little bit more flexibility around working around their lives. So again, I'd look at hours, I'd look at shifts, I'd look at ability to kind of plan different holidays. I could buy leave, I could. So again, all of those things that give a little bit more of that flexibility and control.
And another one from our healthcare piece around burnout, sort of, that obviously that's on the increase, and healthcare has been very hit as an industry, hasn't it, in the pandemic? But what suggestions are there for helping employees with burnout in that sector?
Yeah, it's a great question, and definitely that industry in particular, just emotionally have gone through, so much. I think burnout, as I said, is a really interesting one, as is just our levels of stress and anxiety. All of us can cope with that, when it's temporary, but when it stays for a sustained period of time. And again, I'm not a neurologist, but definitely read a number of studies that have talked to, it just changes the way that we think and process. And that, I think, is where we're at, is this pandemic has gone, it was a sustained period of time, and those levels of burnout and stress have been there. So it's more than just, as I said, a resilience kind of, let's do a buck up kind of session. I think it's about education around getting people to understand how they are feeling and how stress may manifest. So again, I think there's a level of raising awareness and education for people, providing different levels of support and counselling for that. Most organisations, again, different industries have something like an employee assistance program, but there are other kind of support services that you might be able to provide around when that burnout reaches a particular level. I think there's things like defined hours, and this may not for the healthcare industry specifically, but for many others, there's this bleeding of time that goes from my work hours to my personal hours. And that has also created this sense of burnout for many industries, is that I'm always on. The computer's always on, the mobile's always on, there's text messages coming in. I don't have a separation before of here's the hours I'm at work and here's now my hours to recover and spend with my family. And so the more that organizations can do to create some defined areas of, no, it's your time to rest and recover now. And so we're not going to contact you on your holidays. We're not going to contact you out of hours with, text messages, although those sorts of things, I think, are ways that you can start to reduce some of that burnout.
Excellent. Well, I think we're finishing pretty much almost right on time. We've run out of time for any more questions. But as I said before, our recruiters are obviously, a great place to start if you've got questions about your specific industry. But if you do have further questions as well, we're happy to farm those out. So please email us at marketing@frgteam.com. But we want to thank everyone for joining us today. It's obviously people's lunch hours, so we won't take any more of your time. Thanks so much, Charlene, for all of your insights. We look forward to getting this report out to you, and also, getting you a recording of the webinar. So thanks very much again for your time, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.